Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. I'm Lauren V. Davis, and on this podcast, I have conversations with guests who share their personal stories, their insights, celebrations, sometimes even the chaos that they faced while building their powerful brands. My guest today is Valerie Morris, and we're going to be talking about how to self-publish a book. And I mean, she does not hold back on this episode. Valerie is a real friend of mine. And when my friends are launching a book and need someone to manage it or need someone to run the whole cycle, I always recommend them to her. But I didn't really realize just how much important information she was going to share inside this interview, so you are really in for a treat. We're going to talk about how she launched her very own best-selling book, her considerations she thinks you should make around self-publishing versus traditional publishing, realistic timelines for your book launch, timing for your launch, like making it effective and efficient, how to pick your topic and your subject for the book, when the best time to launch a trendy versus an evergreen book might be, how to market your book before, during, and after the launch. Like, there's so many topics that we covered in this short podcast, so I can't wait for you to listen. P.S. If you are an author or a speaker who's looking to get more leads and business from stage without feeling salesy or pitchy, I might have the perfect resource for you. First, I have my Grow Your Professional Speaking Business Workbook, and we will throw the link to that into the show notes for you because right now it's only $24. And second, I am launching a mastermind. It's going to be a small, intimate group of people, co-ed. Everyone is welcome, but you will have to apply. And so I have a little waiting list. If you'd like to join the waiting list, we will also throw that link into the show notes for you. I will be telling you more about that coming up. If you hear something you like on this podcast, would you mind letting me or Valerie know? Sharing this podcast with someone that you know would be such a bonus to me. Podcasts like mine grow with people like you who do that little extra bit to just share it out into the world. So I really, really appreciate it. Every single time you do that, it helps. Valerie is a digital marketing strategist, speaker, podcaster, and author. She also has a special focus in book marketing and book launches. When she's not plugged in, you can find her running her hobby goat farm, working on her own artistic projects, and hanging out with her family. Okay, Valerie is here. She's going to share some insights, actionable tips, examples on how she created her business that makes her money but truly makes her happy, and how to launch a self-published book successfully. Let's go. Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast, Valerie. I'm so happy you're here because today we're going to be talking all about how to self-publish your own book, which I know is a subject that so many people want to talk about. So many people are writing books that I know right now. It feels really exciting to just know so many people who are putting in that work and like about to publish. And you worked with many of those people as well. Yeah. And you and I go so far back. I've had you speak at a couple of my conferences, and we met each other at one of the biggest conferences in the country. I feel like we've done so much together, and we have a little mastermind together that meets every other week. So we spend a lot of time together over the last few years, and I'm just excited to like share you with my other people too. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think we first met because we were like random roommates through a mutual friend at one of those conferences. So yeah, I don't know. We just threw each other in. I'm like, oh yeah, like you can see me with my bedhead, like disheveled in the morning, needing coffee. Like, yeah,
I remember
we've gotten to know each other many, many years and in many different situations, and it all kind of ties back to marketing. So there's a lot of people I know in marketing who I can't say are friends, like we're colleagues, but like with you are a friend. Aww. Even if you strip away all the marketing away, I just really enjoyed our friendship. So this is really fun that we get to jump on this podcast and talk about marketing and book marketing specifically. So that's really fun.
I agree. And I feel like the word friend is thrown around so loosely in the digital space, like my friend so-and-so, but truly we are friends. And I also have appreciated your friendship so much over the years and just how we've gotten to do so many different types of things, but also like we always have those side chats and side conversations where we're like, are we on the same page about this? Are all of our
do that,
values matching up here? So I just have really appreciated that as well.
You're right. We do that.
We do quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about launching a book today because you are a book launch consultant. You're a book marketing consultant, and you've also successfully launched your own book that got bestseller in a bunch of different categories. And I kind of want to tell a little bit more of the story of how you started your business and how it brought you to create your own book, launch your own book, and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, yeah. So the book marketing, so I'll start with the book marketing side of things because that's been a new, I'll just say extension or arm, the digital marketing I've been doing for almost 20 years now. And so that's been one thing that has evolved really in the last 5 years after I launched my book. And it's been really fun, don't get me wrong, but there's this it's kind of like an iceberg. It's like you see, a successful book launch that either I did for my book or for a client's book, but underneath it is this huge iceberg of 15 plus years prior of digital marketing and marketing principles that has gone into all that work. And it's fun because a lot of people that I talk to follow or hear in the book marketing space, in the publishing space, they might be talking very technically about something, or they're making a decision about a book launch from purely a publishing standpoint. And they're focused just around the technicality of getting a book listed on such and such website or getting the formatting to be just so that it works in this format. And all of that stuff is important. But a lot of folks in the publishing space are not coming at it from a holistic marketing perspective. And that's one of the things that's been fun for me is because I've been able to take that background in digital marketing in this agency that I've built up and infuse in all of that information and all of that knowledge into how do you launch a book? Because a book is really just, if you think about it, a long form blog post.
Yeah.
It's a really, really long blog post, but it's long form content that is helping position you and your brand in some shape or form. And so when you come at it from that perspective, it makes perfect sense that you would have some sort of marketing strategy around it. You would have some sort of perspective around how am I using this book as a part of a bigger conversation in marketing? How is this getting leveraged into what I'm doing and talking about on social media, in my emails, on my website, in the videos I'm making? It all should work together. And so while I can't always, get a client to do that 100%, because sometimes on the book marketing side of things, I get pulled in purely just for launch day. Hey, we want you to help us go hit bestseller, act as our launch manager, do your thing, tell us what to do, boom, boom, boom. But a lot of times people will bring me in to create a marketing strategy for them around their book. And that's really fun because then next week I have a call with somebody with their social media manager and the author, and we're all meeting together to talk through the plan that I created and how are they going to weave it into what they're already doing on a day-to-day basis so that this book just becomes this seamless part of the process. So yeah, the book marketing stuff kind of became this extension of what I was already doing day in and day out. And in the last couple of years, it's become more and more prominent as I've had more bestseller launches under my belt and people start picking up on the fact that, okay, you're launching a book, you actually should talk to Valerie, or people get confused and they maybe make a few missteps and then they're like, nope, I need to find somebody who can help me do this the right way. And so I've gotten more and more of my name kind of dripped out. It's not necessarily been a huge push up until the last few months where I'm like, okay, this is actually something that one, I enjoy, and two, there's a really big need for this because a lot of people feel confused by it. I've been doing digital marketing for a long time, and doing that done for you kind of agency work for clients all these years. So a lot of it is just getting transferred into this book conversation.
Yeah, and I would be really curious to know more about the mindset of someone writing a book. Like, should everyone write a book? Who should write one? Why did you decide to write one?
So I first decided to write my book because I was at this phase in my business or my career where I was soaking in tons of content. I loved learning. I still do. I just learned that don't have the capacity to soak it all. I gotta say no to something sometimes. But at that time, I was reading a ton of these books, and I just kept thinking, like, one, I would read these books and I'm like, I already know all this. And then two, I was having these conversations with clients or prospective clients where I was saying similar types of things, but in a different way, where it was like, I've got my own analogies, I've got my own expertise that I'm saying to my clients day in and day out in these, Zoom conversations or coffee meetings or whatever. It was this thing of like, well, why shouldn't it be me on the cover of that book instead of so and so? Like, why wouldn't it be me? I've got this expertise behind my belt of running my agency for X number of years and working with all of these clients and seeing all of these pitfalls and seeing all of these things that you could or should be doing to get your name out in the world. And so that's what I ultimately decided to do, was to put it in a book form. At the same time, I was also wanting to do more public speaking. And I just knew from observing speakers, from the little bit that I had been learning about, how to grow your speaker career, is that in a lot of situations, like having a book can be a really great asset to your speaker career. And so I decided, this is a really good time in my life where I've got the expertise, I have the bandwidth to do this. This would have been very difficult for me to jump into right now in this season of life that I'm in. Just you and I, more of my story, but like I've got two young kids at home and trying to juggle work, life, personal, all the things. It'd be really hard for me to take on a book project to that level now. Now I do have a few book project ideas in the works, but it'll be much slower because I have so much going on. But I knew at the time that as a speaker, having a book would be really important. And so that was also a motivation for me to kind of level up my professional kind of persona of having a book. And it is interesting because my book wasn't even done yet. Some people knew that I had it coming, and I already booked a speaking gig for like 3 weeks before my book launched, or 3 weeks after my book launched. So it was great timing. It worked out great. But yeah, I got a speaking gig and my book wasn't even out. Like, just the mere fact that I had a book was enough for this event organizer to say, hey, I know your reputation essentially. And oh, wow, by the way, the fact that you got this book, like that makes it even more impressive.
So that brings me back to the question then, who should write a book? Who do you think should write a book?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I do think that everybody that is looking into doing public speaking should consider something like that. Really, anybody that's got like that personal brand that they're wanting to flesh out and identify. I will say though that I think there's a little bit of life that needs to be lived before you can write a book. And I don't know that there's necessarily like a magic knowing of like, oh, you've lived enough, you're ready to tell this story. But for me, if I had decided, within the first year of my business that I should write a book about, expert marketing tips on how to get your message out in a noisy world, I don't know that it would have been as effective because I didn't have the tenure to back it up. I didn't have the experience to back it up. On the same token, I've also lived a lot in my personal life, for example, in the infertility space. And I am starting to get enough away from that season of life. We are done having kids. We're done doing IVF. We're done with all of that stuff. It's not to say that it's ever going to be quote unquote done, but 3 years ago, I could not have written about it or even talked about it much with people. Now, because I'm a little bit further removed, I've lived enough of it, I can talk about some of it. So I do think there is some wisdom in knowing, am I ready to talk about XYZ in a book form? Because it is fairly permanent, so regardless of whether you're writing something that's business and educational in nature versus something that has personal nature to it, I do think there is a little bit of just personal wisdom and reflection that you need to take of saying, am I ready to tell this right now? But
Do
I
you
do think
think
most people have that in them to write a book.
do you think that there is a way, like, okay, so you have a bunch of book ideas. I know I have some book ideas in me. I know
Yeah,
that others do too. How do you kind of strategically think about the subject of your book and what your book should be about? Because I hear what you're saying about, being sure that the stories you're telling and the subject matter is something that you want to kind of stick by because it's permanent. It will live out there forever, right? And at the same time, I wonder, like, how do you kind of go about strategically picking which way you want to go with a book? Like, some people, I'm sure it just comes to them, right? They just know.
sure.
And other people, I think they probably have a few ideas and they're asking themselves, which one do I go with? Which one will stick?
So I think it depends on your goal. So if your goal is a business related book that has some sort of tie and strategic purpose within the larger scheme of your business or the larger scheme of your brand, whatever that may be, I would think through, what is the goal? What is the call to action you want people to take as a result of the book? And then work
That's good.
backwards from there, right? Because you're, like I said earlier, it's like a long blog post almost, right? It's a really meaty piece of content. So ultimately, it needs to fit in with the bigger picture of your marketing plan for your brand. Where are you going with your brand? All those things. So you don't want to necessarily write a book about, like, I wouldn't necessarily write a book about like TikTok strategies. If my goal is to be working with a lot of, let's say, B2B, more tech, buttoned up brands, which a lot of my agency clients tend to be, I might instead say, okay, if I'm going to pick a platform to write a book about, it's going to be about LinkedIn.
Mm,
So it's more around like, let's be strategic with what are you going to write about in the bigger scheme of things. I'll also say when I wrote my book, I was very conscious to write it more on strategy versus tactics because I didn't want to have to rewrite my book a year later when everything changed,
that
you
was the
know?
next question I was going to ask you is, like,
Really?
how do you choose what's the difference between writing an evergreen book versus something that's trendy that will kind of go out of style? Do you have any tips
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I think you just have to be okay. I mean, you have to be okay with the fact that something might go out of style. It's interesting. I have a friend who launched her book in December, and she was just telling me that, like, at the very last minute, she had to go through and make sure that everything was switched to X instead of Twitter because of the name change. And so, just keep in mind that like things can still change from the time you write a manuscript to when you're even ready to go live with it, because there is usually like a pretty big gap as you ramp up to your launch day. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes in even once your manuscript is done. So I personally like to write things that are more evergreen in nature. And I realize that like sometimes that's not always doable. And if you have the capacity and the time to strike while the iron's hot on like a trending topic, and it's a great way to establish yourself as the authority in that topic if you can jump on it right away. But if you want something that's more timeless, especially for speakers, like if you want something that you can leverage for, multiple years in your speaking career, I would go more the evergreen route and just maybe be strategic about, I've seen some people do this where there's like maybe some specific call outs at the end of each chapter that talk about tactics, or there's specific spots so that if you do need to make updates, make a second edition, make a third edition, whatever, it's easy to know where to go to make all those
Yeah,
adjustments. You're not having to scour the whole thing.
that
So there
makes
are a few things that you can do just to like set yourself up from an organized perspective of like, okay, this is easy versus like, oh, I have to spend hours combing through this text.
that makes so much sense. Just to be able to create those changes easily and make it relevant to whatever time you're in if you have a more tactics based book on something very specific. Okay, so you have a book, you have a book idea, you decide you want to launch a book, you want to write a book, and you decide the subject matter, you decide how it's going to be. Once you have that in mind, you kind of have to decide how to publish it. And that's kind of the big elephant in the room, is like, what are the considerations that you should have in self-publishing versus going a more traditional way? Like, what are the key differences between self-publishing and self-launching a book independently versus through a publisher? And what should you know if you decide to do it one way or the other?
Yeah. So you really have, like, on one end of the spectrum, you have traditional publishing, which usually you have to get a literary agent to help pitch your book proposal. You have to kind of write a couple chapters and create a book proposal to pitch to a publisher. So you may not even finish your book yet before you get a publishing deal. That's a lot of work just to get the publisher. And while it is very nice to have certain publishers' logos attached to your book, traditional publishers, I've worked with many clients who have gone that route, and they still have the same pitfalls that a lot of self-publishing authors have, because they don't realize that the publisher doesn't do a lot to actually do the marketing for your book. They do a few little things, but nothing really of huge substance. So it's really up to you to be leveraging your audience to be promoting your book. Now, granted, a traditional publisher, like, they're gonna take care of a lot of really nice things for you. Book cover, all the logistics behind creating a beautiful printed product or digital product. They're gonna help, they're gonna take care of a lot of those things, but they're also gonna take a huge cut for the lifetime of the book. And so any royalties that you get are going to be pennies compared to somebody who's self-publishing and promoting their book. So then you have, on the other end of the spectrum, you have self-publishing, where essentially you are the driver, the owner, you have access to everything. You can change whatever you want. It is all in your control. That also means that it's all in your control. And so you have to be the one to drive that ship in terms of, okay, I need to have an editor. I need to have a proofreader. I need to have a formatter. I need someone to design the cover of my book. Do I need a website for my author brand and my book? What's my marketing strategy? How am I going to launch this? How do I put it up on all these platforms? Like, there's a lot of little nuances that you have to figure out as a self-published author. The nice thing about that route is there are people like me that can be hired to do a lot of that work for you, and you essentially just pay for the help, right? But you own the control. You're just paying for the consultant services to help you get there. And then there's like hybrid publishing, which is kind of a meld between the two. There's all sorts of different options in the middle of that, but those are kind of the two extremes.
So do you recommend self-publishing a book? Or do you think it's different depending on the goal of the speaker, or the goal of the entrepreneur?
Yeah, I personally recommend self-publishing. And I just think, like, from a big picture perspective, it gives you the most control. And in today's world, there are so many experts you can find. If you want to, you have to do a little bit of legwork to vet them out. But so many different experts you can find to help you achieve this similar look, feel, accomplishments as a traditional published author is. And you can achieve those same results and yet get more of the royalty cuts. You have full control. A lot of times traditional publishers, I don't know what the deal is. I don't know. I had one author I launched early January. We did all sorts of research around the best categories to put them in to have the best chance of success for bestseller status. And their publisher just ignored our request to change the categories. And the categories that the publisher had put them in weren't bad categories, but they weren't the best. They didn't do the right research around what to do if they want to go after bestseller. Because again, they're going after publishers kind of just think in terms of, well, this is the way we've done it for so many years. They don't really think outside the box all the time. And again, every publisher is different. So I'm not trying to like rag on publishers at large, but this one was frustrating. And I've had this happen in other instances where they just kind of ignore the requests if it's different from the advice that they gave. And so anyways, all that to say, self-publishing has been great from that end of things. But if you struggle a little bit with like the management piece of it, I do recommend like hire somebody to run point for you, to coordinate and work with your designer, work with your formatter, work with your editor to keep the process going forward. In today's world, in today's gig economy, you can find people who can do that for you.
I love that. Okay, so you've decided on your book, you're going to self-publish, and you start writing, and then it's kind of time to build excitement around it. It's time to start getting some promotions out there or start gathering people to know that you're writing your book. It's not just you write the book and then you publish it and then you market it, right? It's kind of a longer step process. So my question is, what is a realistic book launch timeline, and when does the marketing of it or the process of sharing your book with the world start?
Yeah, so to write the manuscript is a huge feat in of itself. And a lot of people get really excited once they have that in hand and they want to like just say, oh, it's live, go buy it. But when you do that, I get it, you're so excited. But when you do that, you really miss out on all the buzz you could have been building around your book to make it look larger than life. And I've seen this work really, really well with authors who have really small platforms and authors who have really big platforms. But regardless of the size of platform, if you're starting to build buzz months in advance, and I'm talking somewhere like 4 to 6 months, like that goes fast. 6 months ago was like, I don't know, it was almost summer at that point. And here we're in the frigid winter. Like it was not that long ago. And the months and the weeks go by so fast. So similar marketing principles to like, this is like part of what comes out from like having this digital marketing background. You have to have consistency and repetition in your social media game, because the algorithm doesn't show everything to everybody every time. So if you want the whole world to know you've got a book coming, you can't talk about it just once. You have to be dripping it out consistently over that 4 to 6 week or 4 to 6 month period. And then as you get closer to your launch date, then you get a little bit more strategic in terms of, okay, how am I going to make this one day and 1 week make my book look larger than life? And a lot of that comes behind the scenes. My big push with people is build a launch team, build this group of people who have said, yes, I want to help make your book look great on launch day, and like gear them up in the like 1 to 2 months before your launch, so that on launch day, you look like this rock star that's like, oh my gosh, Valerie has all these people talking about her book. Like this looks like something I should buy. And so you just build this hype, and it's not necessarily artificial hype. It's just strategic hype is really what you're doing.
Do you think that your launch team has to be made up of super influential characters, or can it also be your mom or your dad or your sister, like some people in your family that are so excited to see you succeed? Is it silly to have a launch team full of those people, or do you only need influential people in your launch team?
No. Okay. So keep in mind, like anybody has influence, but sometimes those like really influential people, like they're busy. And so sometimes they're helpful and then sometimes they're just not. So I personally like, yeah, if you've got connections with people who have huge audiences and huge lists, like include them. But don't discount Great Aunt Carol, who's retired and doesn't really care about your subject matter, but she cares about you. And so she's going to go buy your book regardless, because she thinks you are awesome and she thinks it's really, really cool.
And she's also going to have the whole book club buy your book. Yes. And they're going to discuss it and they're going to tell people about it. Yes. And they're going to buy it as a gift for their grandchildren for Christmas. And I just think I personally always live by the idea that everyone is an influencer to their own network of people.
Yeah.
And you can't discount I can't discount your network. You can't discount my network. And even when we were like 10 years ago, when, we had a much smaller businesses, much smaller circles of influence, you still had a network then, and you were still an influencer to that network of people. And I live by that, because every conversation you have, whether it's somebody in line ahead of you at the coffee shop or somebody at the airport or somebody that you're coaching, they are the biggest influencer inside their network. And that is, it puts into perspective that you have more locus of control than you think you do,
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is just like, remember that everyone, like, you never know where your next lead could come from. Like, one of my husband's best consulting clients came from our retired neighbor, and we live out in a neighborhood of 14 houses in the country. Like, what are the odds that this guy who was pushing 85 would be able to point this great client to my husband?
Mm-hmm.
Turned out to be, still is a great client for my husband. Like, he's been working with them for like 6 years. So you just never know, like, who's going to be a good referral source for you. So you don't want to discount people. And also just remember that, like, writing a book, like, if you're in the business and marketing space in any shape or form, you might think, okay, a book, everybody's writing a book. Maybe you feel like, if you're in networking groups or masterminds or whatever, a lot of people on your level might be writing a book. But go take that back to maybe your high school reunion and go think about how many people you're sitting at the table with at your high school reunion who's written a book. You might be the only one. So it's just really important to, like, step out of your normal circle and say, nope, writing a book actually is a big accomplishment. And when you think about it in that way, a lot of your friends and family from other circles of life are going to be really excited to be a cheerleader for you, even if they don't care about the subject matter. Or maybe they want to care about the subject matter, but they're just not there yet. And so this is their first opportunity to, like, oh, I have wanted to learn about marketing. I've been at home with my kids for these 10 years, wanting to get back in the workforce. Lauren's book could be like my first foot back in the door. So you just never know. And so that's why I say, like, cast the net wide when you're thinking about who to bring into your circle.
Yeah, who to bring into your launch team or your promotions team, or even who to just tell about this. Like, how do you have the confidence to talk about your book or to present your book to the world when maybe I think a lot of people that I know struggle with the idea of, like, oh, I don't want to promote myself too much, or I don't want to. And first of all, I think that's silly, because yes, there will always be haters. And also there will always be so many people standing in your corner and so many people wanting to cheer you on, right? Like, so many
for
people.
Sure.
But how do you kind of find that confidence and mindset to be like, hey, would you like to join my launch team, read my book, my words, and then talk about me and my book to other people? Tell me a little bit more about how some people can get over that kind of limiting belief and mindset, show up confidently.
I still struggle with this a little bit. And I come back to the phrase that I keep coming back to is just the concept of, like, do you have knowledge or experiences that by sharing them could help somebody else prevent other mistakes or whatnot? If you have something that could help, then you have something worth talking about. It's not about promotion. It's about, do you have something that other people need to hear? And when you frame it in that way, it's like, oh yeah, like, I would be doing people a disservice by not sharing some of this information that I know helps people get noticed more online, that helps people get their message out. Obviously, if you have a more personal subject matter or whatnot, sometimes those messages could be even more vital. Like, one of the books that I helped launch last year actually was around suicide prevention and mental health. And it's like, when you frame it in terms of, like, well, who am I to write a book about this? It's like, no, it's not about me. It's about, like, this message is important for people to know. Somebody else could have written the book, fine. I just happened to be the one to put this on paper. This is an important thing for people to know. And so when you frame it that way, it becomes a lot easier to talk about things and to share about it. But in terms of actually inviting people to join your launch team, like when people hire me, that's the only part of the process that they actually have to do. And it's only because they have the relationship there and I don't yet. So I typically have them, we just set up a Google form. It's nothing, no rocket science there. It's just a Google form. And I build all of it for them. And I just say, hey, point people to this form, invite them to join your launch team and sign up here. From there, then as the launch team manager, I jump in and I take the rest of the plate off. It's like, hi, I'm Valerie. Lauren hired me to, or Lauren brought me in to manage her book launch, and I'll be walking you through every step of the way. And you know what? When you have someone like that doing that for you, you look like you have a traditional publisher in place because you've got people. You've got people who do this for you, you know? And so your launch team actually tends to take it a little bit more seriously because they think, oh, this is a pretty big deal. You know, Lauren has this girl, Valerie, who's doing all this stuff for her. Like, this book launch is a really big deal. I need to do my part. So a little bit is around the psychology there, but, you know, it's just inviting people to join. And I try to keep it simple for people. You don't want to overwhelm people with too many things that they have to do. And so there's, you know, a lot of things that kind of I do strategically to keep it simple, but yeah, it's just an invitation. Like, do you want to join? No pressure if you don't. So
That's awesome. It does bring up the question for me, what are some tips for timing a book launch effectively? Like you've mentioned the amount of months, but like kind of what should you be doing in that first section, middle section, and ending section?
okay, so that's like a whole, like, probably day webinar,
Yeah,
or
right.
day workshop. I'll just say one of the biggest things you can do with your launch team is to time that well. So I typically tell people anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks before your launch day, get your launch team in the mix. And I say that because I have been part of launch teams where there was 6 months before their launch day. And I was so confused about what I was supposed to be doing that far out from this. They were doing podcast this and social graphic that. They added everyone on the launch team to their Trello board, to all these different tasks. And I was like, I'm sorry, did I just sign up for free labor for you? I was so confused. So I actually quit the team. On the other token, I've had friends send me stuff with less than 48 hours notice of, hey, thanks for, being on my team and helping me do XYZ. Can you do this in the next 2 days? If you look at your own schedule, odds are you are pretty packed in the next 2 days. You've got your thing figured out of like what you have on your calendar. So to assume that someone could jump in and do something with 48 hours notice, like reading a good chunk of your book, like that's a lot to ask of people. So that's why I like to give like a good enough time frame where people can take action, feel prepared for launch day. They could block out time already to help you out. Like, you give them enough notice, but you also don't give them so much notice where they forget about it or they get confused. And so there isn't necessarily like an exact thing, like it has to be 45 days. It has to be 23 days. But you just want to make sure that you're being respectful in how much time you're giving to other people, because you're asking something of them, And so that's why, like, I usually like to say, like, figure out what date you're working towards and then work backwards from there. And give yourself a little bit of buffer, even beyond that, of like, if I think this is going to take me a month to get my book cover designed, I'm going to give myself an extra week just in case we're running late, so that you're not in the 11th hour scrambling to get things live on Amazon or live on Barnes and Noble. Like, you got it all figured out.
Okay, I have one more thought about this whole launching a book, self-publishing, that I think we think about like the first step of it, but we don't necessarily think about the last part of it. Let's talk about after you launch the book. How do you keep the momentum and the marketing and the excitement going? Because I've seen so many authors who launch. So I've had so many clients actually who launch, and then after it's all over, it's almost like after the wedding is over, or after a big life event is over and you're like, oh, I'm so burnt out now. I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do with myself. How do I keep the promotion going? I just want to kind of rest. Are there some foolproof ways that you can keep your promotion going? Are there some strategic ways that you recommend entrepreneurs kind of keep the excitement bubbling over as their book launches and as the weeks and months go on?
Gosh, there are so many things you could do. So I'll just name a few that kind of come to mind right now. First is put it in your email signature. Make it very obvious to people that you have a book, because I can't tell you how many times I get email introductions for people for my digital marketing agency that then I do a reply and say, hey, great, I'd love to chat with you. This is their first kind of response or interaction with directly me, right? They got the intro, but now I'm replying. In my email signature, I have check out my book. And so that is great, because then they just subtly see in my email signature that there's my book and it's about XYZ. And that's a subconscious impression in and of itself for confidence for them to work with me on the agency level, right? So whether they buy my book or not, it's doing something for me. But then also it's really easy for someone to just click and go buy. So that's one simple thing. The other thing is I like to reference it from time to time in my email marketing and in my social media. I try to sprinkle it in from time to time. But there's, as you know, there's an art to how you talk about things. You don't say buy my book every time. You might pull a quote from it or share a review about it or whatever. You're referencing that you have a book and you're talking about it without necessarily selling it. It's just that reminder of oh yeah, that's here, because you tease out a little bit of it and people are going to want more. And then the other thing that I'll just share that I did, which it's not a secret at all, if you read my book or you paid attention at all in my stuff, is I actually made a podcast specifically for my book. And in it, I interviewed 15 or 16 people that ended up, I used the content from those interviews in my book. So I referenced them. I talked about them. I talked about their strategy, implemented, infused it into my book. So then after my book launched, then I started releasing those podcast episodes. And so with each new podcast episode I put out, as I was talking about the episode, I could also reference the fact that you can go deeper into it in my book. And so it was this more integrated way of oh, the book is more than just a book. There's also this podcast. And oh, by the way, the podcast actually helped me write the book in the first place. So it gave me something over the months after my book launched to talk about without just being a broken record. And it also then helped me get my book into fruition in the first place. So if you can think about some of these strategies before you write your book, you might find something where you're oh, I could do that too. I could infuse that into my strategy as well. I would hope that people hear this and say oh yeah, that's a great idea. I could do that, steal people's ideas, go do it. Because if it's going to help you move your marketing forward, that's the whole point of sharing some of these things. So yeah, there's a few things you can do, but I think the weaving it into just featuring other people and featuring other snippets from the book is one of the best ways you can do it. And just reminding people that it's there, that email signature is really powerful. People pay attention to email signatures. Nowadays, people expect a calendar link to book time with you. They expect a phone number. If they're trying to contact you, they're going to go back and search through old emails to see, how can I get a hold of Lauren? They're going to know oh yeah, Lauren wrote that book and it's in her email signature. I can easily grab that and send it to someone when it comes up in a conversation.
Those are such brilliant tips. So much gold there. I want to ask you the last question, and this is a question I ask all my guests, but what is one myth that you want to bust about launching a book, Like everyone thinks it's this way, but I need to set the record straight.
I think everyone thinks that you have to have thousands of people on an email list to successfully go after bestseller or to successfully get like a good chunk of reviews around your book and build some good buzz. And the reality is you don't need thousands. You can work the math to figure out and do it with whatever size audience you really have. I've seen people on very shoestring, they're brand new, they don't really have a huge audience, build really successful launches because they are strategic with how they're building it. I've also seen people with huge lists go after really big goals as well, and they do just as well, but you don't have to have the huge list. And I think the traditional publishing space is often looking for those bigger names. Not always, but a lot of times they're wanting to see, do you have the following on social media? Do you have the email lists? And that can be really discouraging for authors that are newer that feel like, hey, I've got a really important message to send, but I don't have that huge following yet. I'm brand new. Like, what do I do? You still have a space and you still have the opportunity. You just have to be strategic with how you go about it.
Yeah, I would say not even just strategy, but just like the way that you are creating relationships. Like if you know that you're going to launch a book even in the next 3 years, just get really conscientious about how you are interacting with the people that you want to serve, like really pay attention to them and not create relationships. I said create relationships. What I meant was really develop the relationships that you have. Really think about the people who are already at your party, the people who are paying attention and they're in the room and they're excited and they're in the proverbial room,
Yeah, 100%. I took note as I was preparing to launch my book. I took note of who had already been expressing interest and was already a cheerleader for me. And I took note of those people so that as it got closer to launch, I was like, okay, I definitely want to make sure that they're invited to this launch team, because I know that they're probably going to say yes. And so it can be as simple as just like a note on your phone of like, these are the people I want to make sure I engage. Like, it's not rocket science. It just takes a little bit of thought.
Man, this is such a wonderful conversation with you today. I am so excited for all of these tips. Like this was supercharged tactical stuff. And I'm excited for people to take advantage of listening to this podcast episode, but also following you, getting to know you more, and hopefully hiring you in the future to help them hand in hand launch their own books and hit bestseller. So exciting. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for just like, so many of the questions you asked really lend itself to like, okay, what does it really take? So it's fun to get into some of that tactical stuff because you know me, I'm a box checker. I like to do things. And so I like it when people give me something that I can really handle and do something with.
I love that about you. So thank you for being here. Thanks for giving so much to this audience. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Personal Branding Podcast with my guest, Valerie Morris. Here are a couple of things I wanted to pull out and highlight for you. First, Valerie iterated everything that she learned over time with her own book and learned valuable lessons along the way. And now she has helped so many people do the same thing. I just think I love talking about how so many business owners don't have success overnight. They don't figure out every single thing that they're passionate about overnight. And Valerie's been in this business a long time. I just think that was something there that I really wanted to pull out for you. She also recommends taking an approach of getting others involved every step of the way, even in the content of her book. And I really liked that. I think from this podcast, I'm also convinced now that self-publishing is probably the way I would go, but I want to hear what you would think. What did you think about this episode? I want to hear from you. Find me at L Davis Creative everywhere. Text me, email me, call me, like whatever you do, just let me know what you thought about this episode because I'd really like to hear from you. I want to know what stood out to you because I like to bring you content that's relevant to you. And so whenever you kind of give me that that little spark of validation that this was a good episode, that this was helpful, I know which way to go. P.S. Just a reminder to check out that workbook for building your speaking business for only $24. The link will be in the episode notes, as well as a link to join the waiting list for my upcoming mastermind. This mastermind is going to be perfect for authors, speakers, entrepreneurs, podcasters, and business owners who are really just looking to make their presence more well known, build up their personal brand, build up their personal branding, so that their personal branding can bring in some more significant cash flow to their business, either online, in person, through more speaking gigs, through more guesting opportunities. This is going to be the mastermind for you, and I'm keeping the price low. Thank you for tuning in to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. I can't wait for next time.